I wanted to make a video response to a lot of the articles that are going around at the moment about patient activists ruining science in the field of ME/CFS. There's a couple of articles at the moment on The Times which discuss online trolls and apparent harassment of certain individuals who have taken part in a trial called the PACE trial. Michael Sharp, one of the authors of the PACE trial, and his various colleagues and friends have long held the belief that ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis, or chronic fatigue syndrome as it's often known, is a result of false illness beliefs and deconditioning, physical deconditioning. The findings of the PACE trial have informed the treatment of patients with ME, but there has been a lot of resistance from patients. Michael Sharp and his colleagues and friends like to say that this is because we are against science. Several patients who had had ME for years were very surprised by these findings because they're basically completely the opposite to the patient experience. For us, it's very much a case of you try and ignore your energy envelope and continue to push, you crash and you get worse. That's what happens. Some patients decided to ask for information using the Freedom of Information Act, and it took years to get this raw data. But when we did, we found that the study was highly flawed. We're talking changing thresholds halfway through the study to make the findings more palatable to the people who were running the study. I'll try and leave links in the description that talk about that in more depth. The same tribunal that allowed the PACE trial data to be released were also given a list of complaints by the PACE trial authors, among which were lists of harassment and threats from patient activists. On being pressed by said tribunal, it was found that the only example that could be found was one of the authors being heckled. So it's worth bearing in mind that there is a history here of a tendency to, if not make up, then greatly overstate how they are being treated by patients and activists. The impression that's given in the media, particularly recently, is that it's only patients, patient activists who are against the trial, and we're anti-science and anti-psychology, and we're the ones who are holding up progress and making life unbearable for these poor researchers. And I want to say that I don't ever condone abuse or harassment, but criticism is not the same thing, and it's not just from us. It's not just the sick people, it's other doctors, professionals, professors. There was a parliamentary debate on it recently. You don't have a parliamentary debate about how the treatment of ME patients is inadequate and outright wrong if there is not something there, you know, it just doesn't happen. Part of me understands that it can't be easy to see all your work be thrown aside and constantly battled, but I genuinely don't see how they can think that it's right. It seems to me either bad science or bad people, and I can't decide which is worse. Bad people is worse. I wanted to make this video to give this faceless mass that we've been branded as, you know, delusional or violent or dangerous or unstable in some way. I wanted to give us a face, because things that we say on the internet, it can so easily be taken out of context. This could be taken out of context quite easily. But you've got to try. My experience of ME, like so many others, I didn't want to be sick. I wasn't going to be one of those sick people. Internalized ableism is a thing. So I fought as hard as I could, and I stayed positive, and it wasn't going to get me. And I pushed myself for 18 months. Every time I would pick myself up and keep going and stay positive. I went to counselling. I would try and do a little bit more each day, graded exercise therapy. And all that happened was the energy crashes where you can barely move. They got worse, and they got more frequent, and they got more difficult to get over, until I couldn't leave the house anymore. And I've been housebound now for 4.5 years. And it's not because I don't want to get better. I think what they don't realise is, if graded exercise therapy and CBT worked, I would be there with bells on. And so would most of us. Sorry. I know that anecdotal evidence is not the same thing as clinical evidence. I understand that. But if the clinical trial that provides that evidence is as flawed as this one is, how then can you take it so seriously? And it goes so completely against not just my anecdotal evidence, but thousands and thousands of people's anecdotal evidence. At some point you have to realise that it's not us having false illness beliefs or being deconditioned. And there are other studies into this from highly reputable, universities and clinical research places. I'll try and link underneath. They've found differences in our blood, differences in our immune systems, differences in our cells, in the way our cells create energy. So many that I don't see how you could think it's anything other than physical. It's like when Andrew Wakefield made that study about vaccines, it's like the medical establishment went, yeah, okay, child death and lifelong disabilities, not as bad as potentially getting autism, which is totally manageable with the right understanding. So let's get those child mortality rates sorted. If that had happened and it had taken this long to sort it out, to even begin to sort it out, because we're still fighting this, then people would be angry. The thing about civility is it's often used as a tool to silence minority groups who are angry about their treatment. People of colour, people of different sexualities, trans people, and disabled people, it doesn't matter. We have to be civil to be listened to. And I don't mind being civil. I prefer to be civil. But that doesn't mean it's not hard. And to see people who have been instrumental in making sure you don't have proper treatment for your illness, proper management, proper funding, to see them continue to reinforce what you know to be wrong is incredibly frustrating and difficult. I don't condone it, but I do understand it. I do think psychology has its place. I see two healthcare professionals and mental health care professionals via Skype on a regular basis, because it's not going to cure me, but it does help me to deal with it. But that's a very important distinction. There has been some backtracking a little bit. There's a lot of talk about, well, the mind-body connection is very, complex and all this kind of thing. And it is. I'm not saying that it isn't. You don't say that about diabetes. You wouldn't prescribe sugar in small doses and then, just ignore the symptoms, just keep having more and more sugar and your body will eventually get used to it, because they don't have any insulin and they will die. I know that some people think that people can't die from this. That's not true. The problem comes with most of these things you see, these articles, is that we are not in a position of power. Once you're listed as dangerous or whatever it is, especially by a mental health care professional, pretty much anything you say can be used as evidence of your own neuroses. At what point is there any culpability on the other side? If you fight against that, then it's because there's something wrong with you. Think about how many movies there are where someone wakes up in a mental asylum and no one will believe them that they're not, sick. I didn't want their voices to be the only ones that are heard, and even though there are people fighting for us, we're still some faceless group that you never see because we're too sick. And I wanted to give us a face, because it's harder to make us seem frightening if you see it's just us. If anyone else wants to join in and show their face, show your face. I'll link to the parliamentary debate information. I'll also provide a link to Dr. David Tuller's information on it, and as many of the clinical studies as I can find. I think that's everything. Have a good day.